Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, They're Pretty Good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and this week we are tackling another Wes Anderson film, one of my favorites, from one of my favorite people, The Grand Budapest Hotel, from 2014. Alright, let's get right into it. We open on a card displaying the words, "On the furthest eastern boundary of the European continent, the former Republic of Zabravka, once the seat of an empire." So right off the bat, they're establishing a fictional country, and just so it's like it's loosely on like what does happen in Europe during the time period, but they're like not tying it to any one specific country, that way they can keep it fantastical and whatnot. All right. So after that, we open on a shot of the Old Lutz Cemetery, and we see a young girl walking in. And she goes up to a monument that is covered with a bunch of hotel keys, and there is a bust on the top of a man wearing glasses, and it says author, and then below that it says the inscription is "in memory of our national treasure." So, and then we see that she's reading a book titled The Grand Budapest Hotel, and then it flashes to the author, and it's a older man, middle-aged to older man, sitting at a desk, and he's talking directly to camera, just talking about the events that took place of him reading the book, and it's like the following is presented exactly as I was told, So he's like just saying like, hey, this is a true story as far as I know. This is just what I was told, and that's how I wrote it. And then But the thing I like about this scene, though, is that as he's doing this like interview to camera, we hear a door open, and then he just starts yelling to someone off screen. He's like, "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!" And then he gets shot with a little like toy gun. And then after like a couple seconds, a little boy comes into frame and gives him a hug and says sorry, and he's like, "That's all right," and then move on from there. I just really liked that moment. I thought it was good timing and everything like that. So then it flashes back again, and we see like a miniature landscape, like a little observation deck and some mountains covered in snow and everything like that. Beautiful miniatures on this film. He's just bringing that feel of Fantastic Mr. Fox, of using the like stop motion and things like that, but this is a little different. He's like tying it in. He also did this with Life Aquatic. Had a lot of miniatures used in that as well. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there's some other ones, but I'm not thinking of right now. But yeah, love the miniatures. We see the hotel, and we see the narration has changed to the younger version of the author, played by Jude Law, and he's talking about being there at the hotel. He's talking to the that basically he's there because he has some writer's block, but also a little bit of depression, things like that. And this is like past the prime of the hotel. This is happening, I think it's got to be like in the 70s or something like that. But I think they say like 70s or 80s, but they don't. But I don't remember. I didn't write that one down. And he's talking to the concierge, played by Jason Schwartzman, another Wes Anderson favorite. And so he's just talking about like the people there at the hotel. That Monsieur I always forget how to pronounce this. I even took French in high school. That shows you how much that helped. I'm just going to say M. Jean. That's Jason Schwartzman. And author's talking to M. Jean. and he's asking about an older man that he keeps seeing throughout the hotel. And he's sitting there alone, and he asks, like, oh, who is that? And he's like, oh, you don't know? That's Mr. Mustafa. He's the owner of the hotel. And they're like, oh, okay. So this is like piqued his interest. But then, so he's asking a little more about him, and he's like, it's weird. Like he owns this hotel, but he stays in the servants' quarters. And he's like, oh, that's weird, So he's like this super rich guy that like owns like so much, like all these castles and everything like that. But anytime he's at this hotel, he lives in the servants' quarters. So it's like, okay, that's really interesting. So we see the author. He's back in. He's in one of the Arabian baths, sitting there, and he hears a voice saying, "I admire your work." And he looks up, and it's Mr. Mustafa, and he's like, "Oh, like thank you." And so they get to talking for a little bit, and he's like saying like, oh, it's a beautiful hotel, and Mr. Mustafa's like, yeah, like it used to be, but it's like in its prime, but I admit it's a little run down now. And then so he asks him like, hey, how did you come to buy the hotel? And he says like, to be honest, I didn't. And he's like, oh, like what? And it's like, but he's like, I'd like to know more. But he's like, how about we talk about it at dinner tonight. Like if you accompany me at dinner, I will give you the full story. And it's at this point they're interrupted by a naked man getting hosed down in the bath, and he's like screaming for some reason. No explanation on that. They just both like share like a smirk about it and then move on. So I like that part. So we see them at dinner, and they're talking. It's like, okay, like, well, the story begins with Mr. Gustav. So, and we open on him. It's 1932. He's setting up one of the suites for an important guest and everything. So he's making sure everything's in tip-top shape, directing everybody like to change the sheets, all that stuff, just getting it nice and perfect. And then we see him talking to an old woman, and it's actually Tilda Swinton in old age makeup, but she looks great. Like, they did a really good job with this. I think that's one of the categories it was nominated for, was best makeup. And she's freaked out about something. Oh yeah, Mr. Gustav is played by Ralph Fiennes, Voldemort. It's probably his best known role. He's also in the newer James Bond movies. He's in a bunch of other things too. I don't want to diminish him to just Voldemort, but that's obviously his most famous role. Anyways, so they're having a conversation. She's like, I'm worried, and like, I need you to come with me. And he's like, I'm not going with you. Like everything's gonna be fine. And you can tell that they have a close, long relationship. And so he takes her down to her car, and she gets in, and she tells him that she loves him, and he says, I love you too, and she drives off. And so she also asks him to light a candle in the church for her and say a prayer. And so he calls over the lobby boy after she drives off and says, like, I've never seen her like that. Like, I've never seen her scared like that. She was shaking like a shitting dog. And so he's like gonna have the lobby boy go do the candle thing at the church instead of him. But then he's like, wait, I've never seen you before. Who are you? And he's like, oh, I'm Zero. I'm the new lobby boy. And it's like, okay, we'll see about that. Like, I'm gonna run like a little test on you and everything like that. And he's like, what about the candle? He's like, no, forget that. So he's going through interviewing him, asking him a bunch of questions. And it's like, oh, like, what experience do you have? And he says a little bit of things, and it's like, okay, like, no, so no, zero experience, zero family, zero this, zero that, and it's like, oh, what's your name? Zero. So, that's kind of a joke and everything. And after all that is done, then he finally has him go, like, light the candle in the church and everything. Cut to a month later, he's got the job. He's you see him, Zero Mustafa is in the. Yeah, by the way, I don't think I mentioned that. That's who is telling the story. Is Mr. Mustafa is Zero. So he started out as a lobby boy. I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, and behind somehow. He's saying that, like, the best lobby boys are invisible but always in sight, which I think that's can be said about any, like, the belief about anyone in a servant status is that, like, they need to be there at all times to, like, do everything for you, but, like, blend into the background, basically. And that's just that mentality of class, I guess, like a class system is playing into that. And just in the narration, Zero's talking about how, like, after a while he was noticing that most of the guests came for Mr. Gustav because he was such a charming, nice person, but a lot of the times it was these rich, old, lonely women who just loved getting the attention from him, and because he was so nice to them and so kind to them, and, like, just gave them everything that they weren't getting at home, either because they had shitty husbands or dead husbands, So, and we just see a montage of him with all these, like, different women and everything, and sometimes he's just eating with them, sometimes he's in bed with them, and all these different scenarios and stuff. And then we get a montage of, like, the daily schedule and the daily routine. Zero's getting out of bed. He's putting his little thin mustache on with a little pen, so it's not even a real mustache, but he just, like, combs his hair real quick, brushes off his suit, and gets dressed and everything like that. And then they got to make the food and all that stuff. Like, Gustav does a little, like, sermon, in quotes, in the kitchen, and it's mostly just, like, how to be a good servant and everything like that. And then we're getting a little bit of insight into how the hotel is run, that they don't know who the owner is, but a lawyer comes down, Deputy Kovacs, played by Jeff Goldblum. He comes once a month, once a week. He comes regularly and meets with the manager at the hotel and everything like that, and Mr. Gustav's talking about, like, just, like, orders from the owner and everything like that. Not that I don't think it seems like it's pretty hands off, and it's just like he brings the money and any information that they might need. That's about it. And then at some point during this time where he's talking about all the different things that are going on at the hotel, he says that this is how I came to meet Agatha, and we see a young girl played by Saoirse Ronan riding a bike down the street, but then in the narration he says, but we won't discuss that. And it's like, okay, so there's obviously some hurt there, but we don't know why yet. And then we see Zero. He's getting a newspaper from down in the town, and he looks down at the paper and gasps, and then just takes off running back to the hotel. And he's running up the stairs, taking the little tram up, and just running through the halls and everything. He gets to a room with the do not disturb on. Mr. Gustav opens the door, He's in a robe, and he's like, what do you want? And he's like, look. And we look down at the newspaper, and Madame D, the old woman from before, the one who was scared, is now dead. So he's like, oh, we have to go to her. So has Zero pack his things and a couple things for him, and we see him on the train. They're taking the train to I think it's Lutz is the town, which is also where the cemetery was, like in the beginning. While they're on the train, they're having a conversation, and then the train starts to slow down, and he's like, oh, why have we stopped? And look out the window, and there's a bunch of soldiers out there. So it's like, okay, now there's starting to be a little unrest in Eastern Europe at this time. This is the 30s. And so as they're sitting there, the cabin door opens, and it's a soldier asking for their documents, basically, their identification documents. And Gustav hands his. Zero takes his. His is all tattered and a little torn and everything. And the soldier gives him kind of a funny look. And Mr. Gustav's like, oh, like that's a migratory visa. He's an immigrant. Like all the information you need is there. And then he's like, oh, like you have to come outside with me to Zero. And he's like, no, like you can't just arrest him for being an immigrant. Like he hasn't done anything wrong. Like what are you talking about? And then they the soldiers grab both of them and like push them up against the wall and punch them and stuff like that. And it's like, oh no, like what's gonna happen? And then Gustav's like, get your hands off my lobby boy and stuff like that, and like sticking up for him and everything, and calls him a bunch of fascist assholes and everything. Then the door opens and we see Edward Norton. Hinkles is the character name, and he's their leader. He's like, hey, what's going on here? And it's like, hey, like, and then they recognize each other, Gustav and Hinkle, and it's like, oh, like you came to the hotel when you were a little boy, right? Like I remember you. And or no, vice versa. It's Edward Norton recognizes him, and it's like, hey, like you probably don't remember me, but like I met you when I was a little boy. He's like, I know exactly who you are. You're little Albert, and I remember your mother, and I remember this and this and this. So he does, like, it's not just this facade of like that he puts on to get in the good graces of these rich people. He really does care about them. And so that's a nice layer to know about him. It's not just this guy that's just like sleeping with these old women just to get money or anything like that. It is just really, he does care about them, which is nice. And so they get let go and everything, and the soldiers apologize to them, and then Hinkles gives Zero a card, like with his name on it and everything. It's like, this should help you, but you need to get your papers in order and everything like that. And you need to apply for a visa and everything like that. And it's like, okay, so they're like, at least we're okay for now. And then the train gets back on the road. Gustav tries to say like this profound thing, like a little like poetic saying about the moment and everything, about humanity, and then he like starts to trail off. He's like, fuck it, you know, because he's just so put off by the whole incident and everything. He can't find like a silver lining in it. They get to the mansion where Madame D lived, and you get a cool shot of the car, the headlights going straight towards this staircase, but then the road turns, so then the headlights turn, but the camera keeps going, and I thought that was cool. Hard to explain. I know it's like an audio thing, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. They get to the door. They're greeted by the maid, Cotillo, played by Leah Seydoux from. She's also in the most recent one or two James Bond movies. I say the most recent two because I haven't seen No Time to Die, and but I did see the one before the Spectre, and I know she was in that one. She's also in Blue is the Warmest Color. She was in Midnight in Paris for a little bit. Yeah, so that's who's playing her. Pretty small part. She has a bigger part in the latest Wes Anderson, The French Dispatch, but still a tiny role in this one. She escorts them to Madame D's body. It's in the open casket. Mr. Gustav gets to say goodbye to her, and he's just like, "Oh, you look better than you have. Like, I don't know what sort of cream they've been putting on you at the morgue, but I want some. Like, you look better than you have in years. You look alive." So then they get escorted to a back room of the kitchen, a little office, where they're supposed to meet Serge, and he's the the head butler of the mansion, basically. And they don't get to meet him right then and there. He walks in, and Cotillo, the maid, whispers in his ear, and he looks up and looks like frightened. Like, he already looks all like disheveled and everything when he walks in, but then like gets a little more scared when he looks up and sees that Gustav's there. He's like, oh, and then he runs out, and then Gustav's like, all right, like, we gotta go, let's get out of here. And so they get up and go and follow him, and they end up at the at this big hall in the mansion where all of her relatives are there to try to get some money out of her, like probably people she hasn't seen in years or has never met in her life, but they're distant relatives, and they're all coming out of the woodwork because this rich relative of theirs died and they want some money. So they're standing kind of in the back. We see that the executor of the will is Deputy Kovacs, Jeff Goldblum, who we saw, and he's also the one who comes to the hotel on behalf of the owner and things like that. So they're getting a little more connections here, and then we see like a pan of the crowd. We see her son, Dimitri, played by Adrian Brody. And next to him is Willem Dafoe, but more on him later. We see his sisters, Marguerite, Leticia, and I forget the other one. But they're pretty minor characters in this. Like, don't have a lot of lines or anything like that. So Deputy Kovacs is up there. He gets the room's attention, and he's saying, like, so she had this will that was written like years and years ago, and I have this giant box full of amendments and things like that we still have to like analyze the legality of those and everything like that. And he says, but there was a last minute letter delivered to me last night from Madame D herself, and he opens it up and reads it to the crowd, and it says that the painting by Van Hoytel, The Boy with Apple, is going to Mr. Gustav H. And everyone gasps because this is like a very important painting and everything like that. And everyone's freaking out, and they're like, who's Gustav H? And so he raises his hand, and he's like, that would be me, darling, or whatever. I think he says darling. And Adrian Brody stands up. He's pissed, and he's like, that effing, though he calls them a British cigarette, let's just say, and walks up to him, and he's like, this man has plagued my family for 20 years, and he preys on mentally feeble old women, and probably fucks them too. And then Gustav just says, like, oh yeah, I go to bed with all my friends. And then Dimitri punches him in the face, then Zero punches Dimitri in the face, and then Willem Dafoe, Joplin, punches Zero in the face. And then it's just like a quick succession of boom, 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 boom. Cut to the next scene. They're back in Serge's office behind the kitchen. Oh yeah, right before they cut away to the next scene, an older man in the crowd of relatives goes, "Where's Celine?" And then presumably his son is like, "What are you talking? Like she's dead. Like we're reading her will." He's like, "Oh yeah, yeah." So just a nice dementia joke, I guess. So yeah, back in the kitchen. They're talking and about the painting because Zero has no idea what it is, and he's like, Gustav's like describing it, and then he gets interrupted by Zero and says, "Can I see it?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't see why not." And so they go to the room where the painting is, and they're looking at it, and as Gustav's talking about it more, they decide that that they're just gonna take it. Like, let's just take it now. Because it's willed to him, so, like, let's just get it and go. So, Zero grabs a chair, he pulls it off the wall, they look up at the empty space, and they're like, oh, we better put something else there, and they grab this painting of two lesbians, well, one's getting fingered. I was going to say they're fingering each other, but there's only evidence of one doing that. So he puts that up in its place, and then they're walking out of the room. They have the painting. They see Serge. And they're like, hey, he's like, can I help you? He's like, yeah, could you wrap this for us? He's like, you want me to wrap Boy with Apple? Okay. And so he goes and wraps it up, and then he puts a letter into the wrapping to make sure that they get it. But he is like, oh, like, I have something to tell you, but I can't say it right now. And Gustav's like, okay, perhaps another time then. And then they leave in a car, and they head there. If we see them back on the train, they have the painting up on the wall of the sleeper car. I think it's what it's called. I forget. The little cabins where you stay, the little rooms. So they're in there. They're admiring the painting, and Gustav's like, oh, like, don't I resemble the painting? And Zero's like, yeah, like, just agreeing with everything that he's saying. And they're like, oh, like, talking about where he's going to hang it up. And he's like, you know what? Never mind. We should sell it on the black market and be on the run in case they come looking for it and stuff like that. And then he's like, oh, like, and then I'll give you I think it was like 1.5% of the sale to Zero. And he's like, how about 10? He's like, 10? Like, that's outrageous and everything like that. He's like, but as a compromise, Gustav says, all right, it'll be 1.5%, but I'm going to name you my sole heir because I don't have any family or anything like that. He's like, okay, deal. So, then he's like, oh, I'll write up the will right now. But then he just hands the pad and paper to Zero and has him like write it as he dictates. And then in the narration, Zero saying how nobody knew where Gustav came from. He never talked about family, anything like that. So he just had this mysterious origin story, and just. But it's one of those things that he probably talked about a little when he first started working, but just by the time he had any prominence in this hotel trade, that just nobody knew anything. He's not something he ever talked about. So they're back at the hotel. They're putting the painting in a safe and everything, and as they're doing that, someone comes in the room. One of the other lobby boys says, like, hey, the police are here to see you. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll be right down. And then they go down there. He walks up to the police. It's Edward Norton is there, and he's saying, like, and you could tell he's like upset that he has to go there and arrest Gustav. And he's like, Mr. Gustav, you're under arrest, and for the murder of, like, you're under arrest for murder. And he's like, oh, like Madam D's been murdered, or, oh yeah, because it's like the circumstances of the death were mysterious before, And so they're just now realizing that she's been murdered, and they think that he's the number one suspect, especially since he got awarded a major art piece and fled the scene and everything like that. So it does look suspicious. Then so he's like, oh, like there's been a murder and you think I did it, and then he just takes off running. But he does get caught. They do catch him, and we see him in prison a week later. Zero's there visiting him and stuff. He's got a black eye. Gustav does. And he's like, hey, what happened to you? And it's like, some lowlife Pinky Beninsky, dared to question my virility, so I, beat him up or something like that. And he's like, if there's one thing I've learned from Penny Dreadfuls is that you can never be a candy ass when you're in prison. And he's like, who've actually become great friends, though, and I'd love for you to meet him someday. Something like that. And so the night before, there was a Zero met with Deputy Kovacs, who is on Gustav's side. He believes that he's innocent and everything like that. So he met with Zero and gave him a little more details and everything. And so apparently there was a mysterious visitor to Madame D the night that she died. And it was someone that they all knew, but they don't know if it, what the intention of the meeting or the contents of the meeting. They know nothing about that. All they know is that there is a mysterious visitor. It's someone they all know. And then later that night, she was dead of strychnine poisoning. And then he reveals who the person is, and it was Serge. And it's like, oh, no, that son of a bitch. And so then we see... he's just getting back to work and everything, and he's, making sure... he tells Zero to make sure everyone's, doing what they're supposed to back at the hotel and everything like that, and not to mess it up while I'm gone. We see Joplin, Willem Dafoe, and he's knocking on a door, and he's questioning Serge's sister, hey, have you seen him? Do you know where he is? And she's like, no, I haven't seen him. And he's like, okay, well, tell him, if you do see him, tell him that Joplin is looking for him. And so he's very sinister the whole time. I mean, Willem Dafoe's great at that, so that's no surprise there. We see Zero giving this speech to everybody the same way that Gustav would, and just giving a letter that Gustav wrote and reading it to them and everything like that while they're getting ready for the day. We see Gustav. He's pushing around a cart through the prison and offering them food. It's a food cart. He's like, oh, can I offer you a bowl of mush? And he gets one taker, and it's this really, really tall guy that gets off the top bunk, and he has to bend down to be seen and everything. But more on him later. Then he gets to his cell, and he's got a box from a bakery called Mendel's, and everyone's excited, we got Mendel's today. And then so they all gather around the table, and then Gustav asks, okay, who's got the throat slitter? And then it's just this shank that they have that they use to cut the cake, and they all split it up evenly. And then they're sitting there talking, and they're like, hey, we decided you're a straight fellow and you're one of us now, so we want to let you in on something, where we have this escape plan. And so they go through the plan. We see Pinky Bendinsky, the one that he was saying that they got in a fight before, and it's Harvey Keitel. He's got a bunch of tattoos on him and stuff like that. And so they're talking. they're going over the plan. The plan is to, but the hard part is there's a part where they got to dig, and they're like, okay, like all we have is the throat slitter. That's going to take years, So like we need something else, and then they all kind of have the idea at the same time of how they're going to sneak tools in, and that's through the Mendel's box, because as we see in a little bit, when they're inspecting all of the food items that come in, like sent from family members and whatnot, they like a loaf of bread comes through and they got to slice it open, or like a block of cheese, and they like stab into it to make sure there's like nothing hidden in there. But then like these like tiny little pastries look so like beautiful that the guy doesn't want to like cut them up, so they just get like moved along. And so they're hiding all these tools inside the pastries. And then it's at this point that the author is talking again, and he says, at this point in the story, Mr. Mustafa became quite distressed, and he looked like he was about to cry. And he's like, hey, what's wrong? And he's like, well, it's just that I can't continue the story without talking about her. And he's like, I need to talk about Agatha. And he's like, but it just pains me so much to do so, but I have to. And so then we get a little bit about Agatha. They met because she worked at the Mendel's bakery, and so when he would get like deliveries up to the hotel and everything like that. They went on a few dates. On the third date, he asked her to marry him. She said yes. We see them kissing. We see them going on a carousel and everything. This like cute little montage of how they like met and everything, and they have like this really nice chemistry and everything. We see her meeting Gustav, and he's doing his own little interview of her, and Zero's all getting worried that he's flirting with her and stuff, and so that was a nice little thing. Yeah, like I said, they're using the Mendel's pastries and cakes and everything to sneak in the tools and everything. At this point, we cut to Deputy Kovacs is talking with Dmitri and Dmitri's sisters. He's saying that there's something's missing from all the documents. Like they've gone through all the documents, but there's like something missing that would add context to some of these papers, but they know nothing about it. So they got to like figure that out. And Dmitri threatens Kovacs, saying like, hey, like you're our lawyer, you work for us. And he's like, no, I work for the estate of the deceased, like that's who I represent, and I'm an attorney, so I'm going to do my job right. So after he threatens them, then they leave, and then Joplin, who's standing in the back holding Kovacs' cat, throws the cat out the window and kills the cat, which that's not something that I like, and it happened in Moonrise Kingdom too, where the dog dies. That one made a little more sense. This one seemed a little more senseless. So it's just a bummer. Obviously not a real cat died, but, it just bummed me out. But, not enough to not watch this movie anymore. If you know what I mean. Maybe that makes me bad. I don't know. And he's like, did he just throw my cat out the window? And the sisters are like, oh, I didn't see anything. Then we see a scene of Zero telling Agatha that they're in her bedroom, saying like, hey, like I need to tell you something. We stole a painting and we're going to be on the run. And in case we do go on the run, like this is the directions on how to get the painting, and you got to sell it for us, and I'll let you know later where you can send the money and things like that. And she's like, what? Like, what are you talking about? I don't deal in stolen art. Like, what are you talking about? And then he's like, no, actually it's not. I misrepresented it. It was willed to him and everything. But then the man who runs Mendel's, I guess he just like watches over her. I don't know. It's like a weird thing because it's not his daughter. but she just works there, but then he cares about like her personal life. I don't know, it's weird. But he's coming into the room, so Zero hides real quick up in the rafters. And then once he leaves again, then he like gives her the card and takes off out of the roof and everything like that. Then we see Kovacs is leaving for the day, and then we see Joplin is following him. But he clocks this as he's getting on the little trolley that he's being followed. He's like, okay, like gets off at a stop and goes and tries to hide in the museum, but Joplin's still following him. He's like going around this dark museum, and it's just this long scene of him like trying to get away. And when he finally think he does get away, he exits. He's like in a doorway of this sliding door that Joplin slams shut on Kovacs' fingers. We see the tips of his fingers come off, and then we see the door open again, and then we see Kovacs Joplin step in. So, but then it cuts away. We don't see what actually happened. It's very implied. Like, it's not hard to figure out, and we do get confirmation later that this is where he kills Kovacs. Then we cut back to the prison, and right as the lights go out, it's go time, and it's time to start the escape. We see them go down in the tunnel that they've been digging in the middle of the floor, like covered with the rug and everything. They go down. They're in this tunnel. They go through a tunnel. Then at some point at the end of the tunnel, they take a dumbwaiter into the kitchen, or one person takes the dumbwaiter into the kitchen and comes around and unlocks the door. They go through the kitchen. They take this big tall ladder and put it down through the middle of a different cell block. And as they're going down the ladder, someone in one of the cells is like, hey, like these guys are trying to escape, and he's about to alert the guards, and then he gets like someone puts their hand over his mouth and slits his throat and everything like that, and that we see who it is, and it's the tall guy from before that took the bowl of mush from Gustav, and he's like, bless you, you sweet kind man, or whatever. And so he like saved them to be able to escape and everything. They get down the ladder. They got to go through the room where the guards are sleeping, so they're like kind of doing like a little monkey bars over them, and then they like got to hop over the beds and everything, go under the beds. They get to a window that they got to saw the bars off. They do that real quick. Then they have this like makeshift rope ladder where it's just like random things like pipe pieces and wrenches and everything like that as the rungs of the ladder. They roll that out the window. They're going down that. Then they got to climb on the side of the building on the windows, sills and everything. Then they get into... Oh yeah, they go down a steam vent into the laundry room, and like pop out in the pile of towels and everything, clothes. Then they open a trap door in the floor of the laundry room that they got to go down into, and as soon as they open the door, there's a bunch of guards playing poker down there, and they look up and they see them, and then one of the guys pulls a knife out of his boot and kisses it, and then jumps down and stabs all of them, but then he gets stabbed too, so they're all dead. Everyone in that room is dead now. So they jump down, go through, end up in a sewer, and then they come out of the sewer, and then we see Zero is there waiting for them. And then Gustav is introducing Zero to all his inmate friends, and he's like, oh, this is Pinky, this is Rolf, I forget, but that doesn't matter, because then he's like introducing everybody that's there, and he's like, oh, and then Gunther was slain in the catacombs, and I just like the line read on that. And then so the other prisoners go onto a bus, they kill the driver, and then they drive away. And then Gustav is asking Zero, it's like, okay, where's the safe house? And he's like, oh, I didn't have time to find one. And he's like, okay, well, what about like a change of clothes? And he's like, no, I didn't bring that. It's like, oh, what about the fake beards? And it's like, no, like I couldn't find any, plus I didn't think they'd look realistic, so I was trying to grow one, but it didn't work. And he's like, okay, well, at least like you brought the cologne, the L'air du Panache. And he's like, oh no, I forgot that too. And this is where like Gustav kind of goes off on him for a little bit, and he's like, oh, like what's wrong with you, like how are you so stupid, like what possessed you to leave your wherever you came from to come here and like ruin everything? And he's like, the war made me leave. And he like kind of explains how like his family was killed by firing squad, and he had to leave because of the war and all this stuff, and the village was burned down. And he's like, oh, and then of course Gustav immediately feels bad, and it's like, I'm so sorry, like I just got upset, like I've been in prison and like all this stuff. So they had this heartfelt apology and forgiveness moment and everything. So then it's like, oh, and then he asks, oh, how's Agatha? And then Zero starts going into a poem, but then we hear the alarm for the prison start going off, and he's like, Zero, I'm going to stop you right there. That's beautiful, but the alarm has sounded, and we got to get out of here. So they take off running. We find out that, oh yeah, so then this is where we see Hinkles and the other police militia people there at the prison, kind of investigating the escape and everything. But then Joplin's there too for some reason, and he's like, hey, like, and he's talking to Hinkles. He's like, oh, the man escaped is tied in conjunction with my employer's mother's death and stuff like that. That's why I'm here. And he's like, oh, like, well, would you have any information on the death of Deputy Kovacs? And he's like, oh, like, it's like, I didn't know he was dead. Like, I heard that he disappeared. And he's like, no, like, his body was found missing 4 fingers and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, so, and then Joplin leaves, like, pulling, like, not fully, like, we know that he's guilty and everything, but, he didn't give away enough. There's not enough reasonable suspicion at that point on the police's behalf. And so he's walking away, but then he looks down and notices the Mendel's box, and he's like, oh, like, wait. And then, so now he has a lead about how they got out, and so he can go there to investigate and everything. So we see, Zero and Gustav are on a train. They're like in one of like the back cars. They're kind of riding with some like chickens and stuff like that. And they're trying to go over a plan. They get off on this one stop, but then they like exit out the back and like sneak off the train. Oh no, I'm ahead of myself again. So they get a phone call. They go to like a phone, like a little pay phone, and make a phone call. And he's like, oh, who are you calling? And it's like, oh, like, how do you win? Like, how do you get tickets, last minute tickets to the opera? How do you get like all these like hookups? And he's like listing all these different hookups that he can get. And he's like, I'm calling upon the services of the Society of the Crossed Keys. So it's this like concierge club, basically, where they all like hook each other up all the time, because they all work at these hotels and they get all these perks and secrets and all that stuff, so they can call in favors for each other and for themselves with each other. So he's calling, he's talking to Ivan, played by Bill Murray, like the biggest staple of Wes Anderson films. Been in every single one except for Bottle Rocket. I don't know if I mentioned that probably did on the Fantastic Mr. Fox episode. Then he makes a call, and it's this long like montage of like, oh, let me make a call, and then he calls someone else, and it's another cameo, and it's like we got Fisher Stevens, we got like all these different people, and then a car comes and picks them up, and it's Ivan, Bill Murray, like leans out the window or leans out the door, like get in, and so they're driving off, and he's like, oh, I booked you a train ticket, and it's like third class or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, like the train was booked, so you got to go in the back, and that's why they're like riding with like chickens and stuff later, and so he's just saying like, oh, you got to go to this place and this place, and this is where they find out that Kovacs was murdered and all this stuff, and oh yeah, and then he's able to like get them like a half-ounce bottle of the L'air du Panache, the cologne and everything. So they both put some on, and they get to the train station. They get on the train. They're on there for a little bit. Like I said, they're in the third class with the chickens and the poor people, and they sneak off the train because there's a bunch of police militia around. We see a scene of Dimitri in the back in the mansion with the sisters. He's got the box full of all the amendments and stuff because Kovacs is dead, so now presumably he's the executor now or whatever. And he dumps it out on the pool table, and they start talking about the Boy with Apple painting, and then that's where you're kind of like, oh, like, you know, let me look at it, because he's like thinking about it, and he looks up and sees that he sees the lesbian painting. He's like, what the fuck is this? And they're like, oh, I don't know, like, I thought, the sisters are like, I thought you took it, like, and so he gets all pissed. Now he knows the painting's missing, and like smashes the other one, the replacement painting, and everything like that. Then we see that Agatha is packing because it's go time on her end too. They're like gonna meet her, like they because Zero is able to get a message to her and everything. So she's has to go get the painting from the hotel and sneak it out and get to them at a safe house. Then we also see that Serge's sister is dead, like, because Joplin got to her. He was trying to get more information. She wasn't given it, and he decapitated her, basically, because we just see her head in a box. Seven style. Zero and Gustav get to this observatory on top of a mountain. Another great use of the miniature models. And then as they're sitting up there, they're approached by a monk, and he walks up to them. He's like, are you Gustav H. of the Grand Budapest Hotel? He's like, yes, I am. Like, follow me. And he puts them on this cable car, and he's like, take this, go, take this cable car. And then they're on the cable car. It's going up. And then they get to a part where the two cables are crossing like an X, but then the car stops. So they're like right at the junction. It's like, okay, that's weird. And then we see another cable car coming, and it stops right next to them. And then the door opens. There's another monk inside the other cable car, and he asks, like, are you Gustav H? He's like, yes, I am. It's like, switch cars with me. So they jump cars to the other one. Got to be careful with that because it's like a hundreds of foot drop. That's not a sentence, but you know what I mean. Big drop. So then the cars start moving again. They get to this monastery, basically this church. They go inside. Another monk is like, put these on. Like, well, first asks, like, are you Gustav H? Grand Budapest Hotel. And you can tell Gustav's getting like irritated with getting asked the same question like 500 times. And he has them put on some robes so they match with all the other monks. They go into the church and sit down. They're all chanting hymns and stuff. And then the person sitting next to them when they sit down asks the same question. And this is where he finally is like, yes, God damn it, Gustav is like, okay, like, then he says, confess. And he's like, I'm innocent. And he's like, no, like, what are you talking about? And then he points to the confessional. And he's like, oh, okay. So he has to go get in the confessional. And he gets in there, and the little slider opens, and we see that it's Serge on the other side. And so he's talking to them. He's trying to get some information and everything. Serge says that there was a second will made by Madame D, and but then like it got destroyed. But I kept a copy, so there's a second copy of the second will, and then so Gustav's asking like, okay, like where is it? And then but Serge isn't saying anything, like where the hell is it? But then he collapses and falls out of the confessional, and we see that Serge is dead. And it's like, what? Like, how did he die? Like, he got strangled. Like, and then they look up, and Joplin's there in a monk robe too, and he takes off running. They chase after him. Everyone gets their robes off. Joplin gets on some skis and starts heading down the mountain. They find a sled, and they are taking that down the mountain. So it's like this big like sled / ski chase down the mountain. They're not able to stop though on the sled, so we see the sled go off a cliff. They try to bail off. Joplin's able to stop, and he's off to the side. Zero, we see his like feet sticking out of the snow, so he like bailed off and is stuck in the snow. And then we see Gustav is hanging off the edge of the cliff by his fingers, and Joplin's there talking to him, and basically like saying he's gonna like kick him off and everything and knock him off. And Gustav's like kind of giving up at this point, and he's like saying a poem to himself. And as he's like reciting this poem, we see Zero come and tackle Joplin, and Joplin flies off the cliff. But the best part is like right in the middle of his poem, Gustav just yells, "Holy shit, you got him!" And then we see him flying off. He gets helped up, and then as they're standing there after he got helped up and he's saying thank you to Zero, they notice that the police are on the other side of the crevice, I guess, and canyon, whatever, and like telling them to surrender and everything. But then they take off running and getting shot at, but they don't get hit. They jump on Joplin's motorcycle, and they're taking that back to the hotel. At this point, we see that the war has begun, like whatever war is happening. I'm presuming it's not World War II, but one of the lead-ups to that, I'm sure. So there's a bunch of soldiers staying at the hotel. It's being like overrun. We see that Owen Wilson is the new concierge in Gustav's absence, and he's like getting all the soldiers checked in, and the police are there, and Dimitri's there, because like it's all culminating here at the hotel, basically. Agatha's there. She goes up and she gets the painting, and as she's riding the elevator back down the lobby, so is Dimitri. He gets in the elevator with her, notices that she has the painting, but he's also a bit suspicious of her already because they have a picture of her, and like, you know, Joplin, when he was doing his investigating and found the Mendel's connection, it's like, oh, okay, it's got to be her that's helping. So then he starts following her around. She loses him in the hallway and then takes off running, but then she ends up falling out a window, and she's like, with the painting. So the painting's stuck on the side of the building. She's stuck on the side of the building. Zero's there. He tries to help her. They both fall into the Mendel's truck. They're like saved by the soft cushion of the pastries, I guess. But then they look up and see that there is an envelope in the back of the painting. And so when they finally get the painting and everything, and everyone's standing around and they read it, the police reads it. Edward Norton, Hinkles, he reads it because he's the law at that point. And then we see that the Madame D left everything to Gustav because this was a special will in the event that she died by murder, which she did because she got poisoned. So in the event that she was murdered, it would all go to Gustav. So we see Gustav is officiating Zero and Agatha's wedding, and it just looks so beautiful. We see that the three of them are riding on a train car, talking, and then in the narration he's talking about he finally got to live like his friends, like he was rich and well dressed and all this stuff, but he never managed to be old like them. So then we find out that he did die young-ish, but we don't know how yet. And then it's also Agatha and my infant child died a couple years later due to some plague thing, some Prussian flu or something like that. I forget what the actual name was. Some little disease that's cured easily today, but not back then. And then we see that it's back to them in the train car. They get stopped again by the military, but this time it's a little different. Their uniforms are different, and we kind of get the sense that maybe they're fighting for the other side this time. So, because it's a lot more sinister. There's the war going on. They come in. It's the same deal. They check his papers. And Gustav gives him the card that he got from Hinkles, and the guy just tears it in half. And it's the same thing again. This time they knock out Zero with the butt of the gun, and then they pick up. Then they grab Gustav, and he's yelling at them. He's yelling the same thing, calling them fascist assholes again. But then it cuts back to them at dinner, telling the story. And the author asks, so what happened to him in the end? And he just says, in the end, they shot him. And then that scene fades away. So just a real sad ending to the story right there. Then it cuts to them saying goodnight to each other for the night. So he's they killed him, and in the end, it all went to me, because he was the sole heir, and so that's why he has this connection with it and everything. And so that's what the author's trying to figure out, hey, why are you staying in this room? Is it and why do you keep the hotel even though it's failing? Is it because of him and his that connection to that old world and everything like that? And he's that old world was dead even before he came into it. I keep the hotel for Agatha because we were happy here. And so then they say goodnight to each other and part ways. The author talks in the narration that he left. I think he went to Costa Rica after that. I forget. He went somewhere more exotic after that. And then we cut back to him as the middle-aged man, finishing off the story, and then we cut back to the cemetery again. And the girl puts a little pin, puts something on the memorial, adds another key to it and everything. And then, that's the end of the story. That's how it ends. Just a very beautiful movie. in so many ways. Like, it's shot so beautifully. Like any Wes Anderson, there's so much symmetry and like perfect framing and very aesthetically pleasing. A lot of pastel colors, a lot of pinks in this one, a lot of pinks and pale blues. Just very gorgeous looking film, but I also just love the heart behind it. I love the story between Zero and Gustav. That's such a nice, like, semi father son, but more like brothers, you know. It's just beautiful, and I like this. Even though there's not a lot of scenes of Zero and Agatha, I like their story too. I like that it doesn't necessarily have a happy ending, but somehow you still feel good at the end. It is still a feel-good movie, even though it's a sad story. And I can't really explain why on that. Maybe it is just because you're having so much fun throughout. But I don't know. But yeah, I've always enjoyed this one. Watched this back when, probably one of the first years I tried to watch all of the Oscar nominees. At least all the Best Picture nominees of that year. So that's how I stumbled on it. I had heard of a lot of Wes Anderson's movies, but I hadn't really seen any of them all the way through at this point. So this was my first one, and this one's so accessible to everybody, you know, because the humor's a little dry in a lot of the movies, so it might not be it's not for everybody, you know. And you'll see that. You'll have people that stand by him, and then people that just don't get it and just hate all those movies, and I get that too, you know. Because there's people I just don't understand, and that's okay, you know, because we all have different tastes and everything like that. But this was my first, and this is how I like fell in love with those movies and everything, and just watched all of them as soon as I could, and enjoyed all of them. And now I own I own all of them, and I've upgraded to Criterions on the ones that are available. There's no Criterion of Isle of Dogs or French Dispatch yet, but if all of his other movies are out, I'm sure those are coming at some point. But, yep, just love his work, love this film. If it wasn't for this film, I might not have discovered the other ones, so just very happy about that. And can't wait to see what he does next. And can't wait till next episode. And haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but stay tuned on the Instagram. The Instagram is @movies they're pretty good with no punctuation at all. And we also have the YouTube, all that. But yeah, just stay tuned. Got another bonus Oscars episode coming this week as well. And also stay tuned for that if that's what you're interested in. And thanks for listening, and I will see you guys next week. Well, later this week, and then again next week. All right, thanks. Bye.